And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 164th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on October 20th, 2020. That's right, 10/20/2020, where I am your host, Nithin Krishnan. Here with me tonight is my usual partner, Matt Lukens. Matt, we're 4 days away from Big Ten football. How excited are you to see this week one matchup, and what's going on in your life in general?
I mean, I can't be more excited than I am to watch IU football. I was sitting, as I do, in the shower, pondering about the mysteries of life, and I was recounting how long it's been since we did a game preview on any sport IU related, and I think I came up with 7 months since we last did a basketball preview for games for the Big Ten tournament, and then now we're here. So it has been a long journey, but I am happy to be here. And look, football is upon us, and it's promising, a little bit scary if you're looking around the rest of the country with what's going on. But as a fan, I'm going to try to keep positive, and we'll keep the realist part of my brain out of this conversation for
now. Well, we were talking about Nick Saban last week, and it looks like maybe Michigan has a little flare-up going on with their university right now, not specifically the football team, but just their school, and I saw some stuff about University of Florida. So, yeah, I mean, 4 days in this era is an eternity. So, fingers crossed for us that on Saturday afternoon, things go off as planned. As of right now, as we dive right into this week one preview, Indiana is scheduled to kick off against Penn State, who's the number 8 team in the AP poll, the number 7 team in the coaches poll in college football. Scheduled to kick off Saturday afternoon at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on Fox Sports 1. I saw that former Bears offensive coordinator Mark Helfrich will be on the broadcast, former Oregon head coach. Completely random fact that's unrelated to anything. But Penn State's a really good team, folks, and Vegas loves the Nittany Lions. Sean Clifford is a bit of a dark horse Heisman candidate. If Penn State's able to win the Big Ten, I'm sure his name will be thrown around in there. Just some general notes. Penn State's a 6.5-point favorite. Might see a 6-point number somewhere, depending on where you go. 6.5-point favorite. The over-under is 59. The high temperature on Saturday is supposed to be 53 degrees and overcast, so it's going to be a cool, crisp Saturday afternoon in October to get things rolling. Penn State's a great team, Matt. I mean, just before we get into the sort of the high-level numbers, what sort of things stand out to you about the Nittany Lions, and what do you think about that top 8 rating that they have nationally?
I'm been a bit of a Penn State hater, one might say. I do think that they preseason are ranked a little bit too high at 8. However, that being said, they do have some studs on their team. Pat Freiermuth might be the best tight end in college football. Look at him to be going in the first round of the NFL draft, if not second round, but I'm assuming first round. He has that level of talent. He is a NFL caliber tight end playing in college football. So that's who they have. And then also, obviously, we just talked about Sean Clifford. Nithin just brought him up, but Sean Clifford, as a redshirt junior, is a really good football player, and he's an excellent quarterback. Now, he's going to have to take a lot more responsibility on this team, given that they have lost a lot of their skill position players, either to injury, transfer, or leaving for the NFL. So Sean Clifford has to take a lot more responsibility. However, he does not have to take responsibility for protecting him, as they are returning most of their offensive line. That's what you call an asset to somebody like Sean Clifford, who has continuity within the protection that he is receiving. So that's great. If I had to point out quickly a weakness of this Nittany Lions team, it's their secondary. They, towards the end of last year, you saw during the Minnesota game, I'm sure Nittany Lions fans, if you're listening to this, you probably don't be bringing that up. But their secondary has some holes in it, has been a little bit leaky. as it has been so under the current head coaching staff at Penn State for a long time now. But that's going to be the one spot I can see IU attacking is the Penn State secondary. Their run defense is really good. Their defensive line is, of course, one of the top ones in college football, as it always is with the level of talent and recruits that Penn State gets. So yeah, tight end, QB, and defensive front are really good for Penn State.
Yeah, that's a really good initial look at the Nittany Lions. Just in case you're curious, folks, the teams ranked ahead of Penn State right now include Clemson, Alabama, Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State, Oklahoma State, and Texas A&M. Penn State's
they're
ranked
a
ahead
good team, but I don't think they're deserving of eighth.
Yeah,
of looking at their roster, especially losing Journey Brown, the running back for the season.
Yeah, they're ranked ahead of teams like Cincinnati, Florida, Miami, BYU, Oregon, and Wisconsin. So, Matt, you just mentioned Journey Brown. Some of the other departures Penn State's dealing with this year include Micah Parsons, a sophomore who declared for the NFL draft and is obviously eligible for the season, but he opted out and State opted out. Parsons was a first-team all-conference selection last year, the linebacker. A couple other linebackers, too, Cam Brown and Jan Johnson. You know, you might remember the name KJ Hamler, the star receiver who moved on to Denver. Fortunately, he's gone, although he didn't make a huge impact for Penn State in the game last year against the Hoosiers. Justin Shorter and Ricky Slade transferred out of the program, a couple of offensive skill players who won't get a chance to step up this year. Slade went to Old Dominion, Shorter went to Florida. Yatur Gross-Matos on the defensive side, the pass rusher, he's out and gone into the NFL with Carolina. And they also lost some members of their secondary, John Reed and Garrett Taylor. A couple of interior players, two offensive linemen, Steven Gonzalez, second-team all-conference pick last year. He's in the NFL right now, as well as defensive tackle Robert Windsor, who's on the Colts. Windsor was a third-team conference selection as well. Before we get into the studs at Penn State, Matt, out of those departures who left the Penn State team last year, who are you happiest to see no longer wearing that white and blue classic Penn State jersey?
I mean, I think you saw it in my reaction to the fact that KJ Hamler is no longer on the team. But he was never going to be on this team this year. So I'm happy about that. I am extremely happy about Micah Parsons.
Yeah.
He's was by far going to be the best linebacker in the country this year. Mm-hmm. And that's like not even an unpopular opinion. That's just a fact. He is a legit top 10 NFL draft pick from the linebacker position. He's a freak athlete coming out of that linebacker position for Penn State. So we are lucky not to be playing Penn State defense with him in it. Otherwise, I might not be saying anything bad about Penn State or the fact that they were overrated. I just think this team was rated with Micah Parsons and with Journey Brown in mind. And now I'm thinking people just kind of, the AP voters just kind of push that out of the brain and go, wait, why isn't he playing when they're watching Penn State? So.
Yeah, that could I don't know if that's the case, but it could be the Journey Brown thing for sure. In fact, we just got news yesterday that Brown, who rushed for over 800 yards last year and had 120 total yards as well as a touchdown in the game against IU last season, he's possibly going to miss the whole season. Now, technically, Penn State has not officially ruled him out for even week 1, but when you hear the words possibly will miss the rest of the season with an undisclosed medical condition, that does not seem like a good sign for Brown's availability on Saturday. You can expect Noah Cain to step into that starting spot for the Nittany Lions. Some other super studs that all of you need to know about Penn State. Sean Clifford, the quarterback, he's a dual threat, folks. He can throw. He's mostly a thrower, but he had over 400 rushing yards last year, hurt Indiana on the ground in the mobility part of the game last season. You talked about Pat Freiermuth, Matt. Really, Parsons and Freiermuth are almost guaranteed first rounders in the 2021 draft. Freiermuth would have been the first tight end off the board, I believe, had he gone to the 2020 draft, but he decided to stay an extra year. We mentioned Noah Cain. Their offensive line is underrated, if you ask me. Tackle Rasheed Walker is still there. He's going to go up against James Head probably on Saturday. Michael Manet is a good center for Penn State. He's a steady redshirt senior option, snapping the ball to Clifford. Jahan Dotson is an interesting receiver who's going to try to take over Hamler's spot. And, of course, the defense at Penn State. Every year it's rock solid. No difference this year. According to ESPN S&P Plus ratings, they're the fifth best team in the country with the 8th ranked offense and the 10th ranked defense. So top 10 metrics across the board. The defensive studs you need to know, pass rushers. I mean, isn't that nice to have 2 super stud pass rushers in Jason Owe as well as Shaka Toney. Toney was a second team all Big Ten pick last year. He's coming back. So even though they lost Gross Matos, Owe and Toney are going to be incredible off the edge and pose a huge matchup problem for Indiana's offensive linemen.
Shaka Toney, by the way, is first team all Big Ten name.
Yeah.
Shaka Toney's a great name.
Yeah. And he's going to have a first team all Big Ten game too. I mean, he's going to have close to that 6.5 sacks that he had last year. And of course that was in an extended, well, I guess normal schedule. This is a truncated schedule this year. I wouldn't be surprised if he had 5 or 6 again this year. The secondary's got a couple of interesting names: corner Tariq Castro-Fields and safety Lamont Wade. Wade put his name in the transfer portal in the offseason and decided to return to Penn State after reconsidering life. Penn State is 22-1 all time against Indiana. The Hoosiers won a few years ago, knocking off Penn State 44-24 thanks to a big offensive day, and you face Christian Hackenberg. So, life couldn't have been all that difficult. So that's where things are. We talked about Penn State studs, Matt. I'm going to ask you the same question. Who stands out to you as the real big X factor or the matchup nightmare that's keeping Tom Allen awake at night?
I mean, if you're talking about Tom Allen, then we're talking about what on Penn State's offense is keeping him awake at night. And it has to be the vision of Sean Clifford running for first down after first down after first down in last year's game against the Hoosiers. So I key on Sean Clifford. And then obviously I talked about Pat Freiermuth not at nauseam, but a little bit earlier. Look, Pat Freiermuth is a stud, very good, and somebody that the defense is going to have to double team to make sure that he is not the person that beats us in the pass game. Any of the other new wide receivers, like you brought up Jahan Dotson, they have a stud freshman wide receiver as well. If they want to beat us, I think we're going to take our matchup with the corners, but we are not going to let Pat Freiermuth beat us, and we're not going to let Sean Clifford run for first downs. That's for certain.
Last year, Clifford, like I said, he had over 400 rushing yards. Freiermuth, the tight end, 43 catches, 507 yards through the air. He had 7 touchdowns. Just a really good blocker too, and that's what makes him such a versatile player. Clifford had a 59% completion percentage, 8.3 yards per attempt, and a 148.5 rating, which is a little bit less than what you saw out of Indiana's quarterback, Michael Penix. Earlier this week, I believe Monday, let's just say earlier this week, both teams released depth charts. Penn State and Indiana both announced unofficial depth charts. Is there anything, Matt, that popped out to you either on the Penn State side or the Indiana side?
Well, I don't know much about the Penn State side, so I don't really have much to say about that other than some of the names that I assumed were going to be starting are starting. So that's good for Penn State. And then for IU, you look up and down this depth chart. I think the skill position, we all knew that Wap, Ty, Miles, Marshall were going to be the 3 starters. And you look at Stevie Scott, obviously going to be the starter, and Penick as well, and Hendershot for going down the skill positions. But when you looked at the offensive line, we were kind of iffy about who was going to be playing at left guard. Mike Katich, I think that's his last name. Redshirt freshman is getting the start at left guard. That's good news, of course. And this is a very young offensive line. If you look at Bedford and Katich, and then you look at who's going to be filling in for them with somebody like a Tim Weaver or a Charlie O'Connor, all these guys are freshmen and sophomores, which is really good for the health of the offensive line moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And at those guard positions, there's been so much competition in camp, and even now it looks like Kadich is possibly going to be the starter. It could be Dylan Powell. There are still some uncertainties there. Mackenzie Nwora could looks like he's going to get the green light at right guard. So yeah, I like how you mentioned the offensive line. We were talking before we started tonight. Old CEO. Big CEO is going to start at nose tackle for Indiana's defense, and we've already talked about how important it's going to be to have a big push up front against that Penn State running game, even without Journey Brown in the mix. And in case you needed confirmation, Brian Fitzgerald is getting the start at the Husky position with Marcelino Ball's injury. Indiana stayed relatively healthy so far. It's just the Marcelino Ball and Raheem Lane injuries that are going to keep both of those guys out for an extended period of time. For Ball, it's the whole season. For Lane, it's just a few weeks here, and who knows when he'll come back. So yeah, I mean, as far as the depth charts are concerned, really interesting to see who got the call for Indiana. As far as Penn State's concerned, I'm surprised to see a lot of just unfamiliar faces. You look at some of the players across the board. The wide receivers, I mean, even the most devout Penn State fans have to be a little uncomfortable seeing Parker Washington and Jahan Dotson and Keandre Lambert-Smith and Isaac Lutz getting slotted in some top 3 or 4 wide receiver positions for the Nittany Lions. That thing will play itself out, but if you ask me, Matt, this is where it's convenient, if not even beneficial, for IU to face Penn State in week 1 rather than week 5 or 6 or 7. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, for sure. We are getting them at the exact time that we want them, which is when they don't have continuity yet. They don't know exactly who they are, and that's the perfect time to catch a team like this, especially with a team like Indiana, like IU, that's returning a lot of their starters and a lot of minutes. We know who we are.
Yeah.
Who's Penn State, right? Like, especially losing a lot of important players, people sitting out, people transferring, people leaving for the NFL draft. They got a lot of turnover. And look, Vegas, like you said, is very high on them. But, it is the first game. I still expect Penn State to be there at the top of the Big Ten, fighting with a team like Ohio State for the Big Ten title. However, crazier things have happened than IU beating Penn State Bloomington. So.
Yeah, and like we said, it's only a 6-point spread right now as things get rolling here with 4 days to go. Before we get into some key matchups, it's time for Who Won the Week in IU sports, and we're going to tip our baseball cap to tall right-handed reliever Aaron Slegers of the Tampa Bay Rays, the former Hoosier starting pitcher. Made a couple of appearances for Tampa in their ALCS series win over Houston to advance to the World Series. Slegers pitched, like I said, in a couple of those games, pitched over 3 innings. He did not make the World Series roster for Tampa Bay as they face the Dodgers tonight, but he could always get called up in case of injury. Slegers, a former Hoosier, keeps adds another name to the list of IU players that have been in the World Series. We saw Kyle Schwarber win it back in 2016. A few other guys have made it as well. So pretty exciting to see an Indiana Hoosier in the World Series. Even if he doesn't officially pitch an inning, he's going to get a ring if the Rays do win it all. Quick prediction, Matt. Rays or Dodgers? Who you got?
Sadly, Dodgers.
No, give me the Rays, Matt.
I don't believe in the Rays, even though I love G-Man and the rest of the Rays. Yeah. But the Dodgers, adding Mookie Betts to that team is just not fair. Somebody, the luxury tax, it exists, but my God.
Looks like the score there is 0-0 after 2 innings in Game 1 of the World Series. I'm sure we'll have a ton of storylines to talk about on our podcast next week, albeit briefly. So as we dive into some key matchups here, let's first talk about Indiana's offense against Penn State's defense. As I mentioned earlier, Penn State's just a very balanced football team. They come in 5th in the country in the S&P ratings, the 8th ranked offense, the 10th ranked defense. Last year, they finished 6th in the country, 13th offensively, 10th defensively, 3rd in special teams even, and those are nationwide rankings. They crushed Memphis in the bowl game. Indiana's offense, it's going to be interesting. Penn State, Penn State has been so tough defensively. They gave up just 16 points per game last year, only 2.5 yards per carry, which was the best mark in the Big Ten. They did leak 250 yards per game in the air, which was 100th in FBS. And if you think back to last year's game, Indiana was able to get Penn State through the air. The first big key matchup I want to talk about, Matt, it's going to be on the lines, okay? Caleb Jones and Matthew Bedford against Shaka Toney and Jason Owe. Just break down this matchup for us a little bit and tell us why it's important for Indiana to win that matchup, because it's probably going to help them win the game if they're able to pull off the upset.
Yeah, the longer Penick gets the ball in his hands and is able to throw the ball and find his receivers, the better it is for IU. I don't think I have to explain to any avid football fan what it means to give a quarterback time to throw. The more times the receivers have to get open, the more big plays are going to happen and the team's going to win. So obviously Caleb Jones and Matt Bedford have a handful and Shaka Toney and Jason Owe. It's not going to be easy matchup for them at all. And I have the utmost confidence in Matt Bedford and Caleb Jones, but and they're going to have to prove it. And Penn State had 2 sacks last year, and that was in an offense where we threw the ball mostly in like less than 3 seconds. We were not holding on to the ball for very long last year. If you're taking a deep shot, it was going to be like a 3-4 step or 5-step drop, and boom, the ball was out of his hands immediately. So look for the tackles to keep those defensive ends from wreaking havoc in the backfield early on in the snap. It's going to be up to Penick to prolong some plays for sure. If he's going to have the ball in his hands more, he's going to have to try to get out of the pocket, which I know scares a lot of IU fans. We're talking about Penick running around. We want him to be stationary and have bubble wrap surrounding every single part of his body. But Penick is going to have to make plays with his legs this game, whether to prolong plays or pick up first downs. And it's up to the tackles to make sure that he has enough time to make up his mind to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a really good breakdown there, Matt, especially when you consider that Jones and Bedford are swapping spots. Jones is going to be the left tackle playing in front of the left-handed quarterback, Penick. Bedford, the right tackle. He's going to protect Penick's blind side. I've got to imagine that offensive coordinator Nick Sheridan, tight ends coach Kevin Wright are going to have 1 or 2 tight ends on the field to help chip, to help buy a little extra time for Penick to get rid of the football. And of course, this is where we even talk about this in the NFL, where guys like Stevie Scott and Samson James in the backfield might have to pick up some blitzes to keep Penick clean. Toney and Owe, I mean, we talk about Scott and James picking up blitzes. They don't really have to blitz when you have 2 great pass rushers like that. They can afford to rush 4 and drop 7. Penn State does play that traditional 4-3 defense, not the more fancy schmancy 3-4 or whatever IU's playing right now. So your typical 43 up front. So yeah, it's going to be huge. I know it's easy to watch the football when you watch a football game, but I advise everyone watching this game on Saturday to keep an eye on Indiana's offensive tackles against Penn State's defensive ends. The next matchup I really want to get into is on the perimeter, where Indiana's wide receivers, who, if you ask me, are the strength of this offense, go up against a Penn State secondary that has a lot of unfamiliar faces. I mentioned it earlier, a lot of new guys. No longer are some of those guys there like John Reed and Garrett Taylor. It looks like Penn State's going to start sophomore a redshirt freshman and Joey Porter Jr. Yeah, that name should sound familiar to some of you Steelers fans. Joey Porter Jr. is the son. There's Jaquan Brisker out there starting at safety. So now all of a sudden you think about this Indiana group of receivers where you've got Whop Phillier, who's going to have a chip on his shoulder. No matter what Tom Allen says in his press conference, Whop's going to be out trying to put up a crooked number on Penn State. Ty Freifogel had 100-plus receiving yards against the Nittany Lions last year. Miles Marshall and David Ellis are going to be dangerous. Ellis had a good game against Penn State as well. Indiana has to win this if they're going to win this game, right, Matt?
Yeah, they do. The receivers have to play well. Penick has to play well. Our running game is not going to win us this game. Like, love Stevie Scott, love Samson Japes. If either of them break 70 yards this game, I am surprised. Combined, they're not going to be running for a whole lot, especially with this Penn State defense. We have to beat them through the air at home on what is going to be a beautiful Big Ten football weather day. We are going to have to use our strength against their weakness and prove that we can beat like the big dogs of the Big Ten using what we are good at, which is passing well.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to put it. You might have some luck on the inside if Harry Kreider has a really good game against the interior linemen that the Penn State Nittany Lions throw out there. But, like you said, that's kind of grasping at straws. If Indiana runs for over 3 yards a carry, I think that'd be an effective day. Last year against Penn State, IU ran for 91 yards and threw for 371. Okay, and that was almost a recipe that led to success against a top 25 Penn State team on the road last year in front of 100,000 people. So with Penick's, slinging the football on Saturday, you can expect a few more throws than runs. So talking about Michael Penix, let's get into it. It's really the first time we're really talking about a Hoosier in depth. Penix, he's going to go up against a really tough Penn State defense. But bottom line, when you go back and look at the stats on Saturday night or Sunday morning, Michael Penix has to outperform Sean Clifford for Indiana to win this one. You know what I'm saying, Matt?
Yeah, they do. Penix has to win the quarterback battle, and last year Penix was sadly injured for the Penn State game, didn't get a chance to, and we've talked about Ramsey before, Peyton Ramsey, who's now at Northwestern. Good luck to him in the season. Go beat some of the West teams. Go beat Purdue when you play them. But Sean Clifford won the QB matchup with his legs last year, not with his arm, with his legs last year, playing and running for some clutch runs, scoring 2 running touchdowns in last year's game. Penix has to win the quarterback battle. Again, we just talked about how the wide receivers need to pick on the secondary. Well, the wide receivers need to get the ball in places that they can make plays, and Penix is the guy to do that, obviously, being the quarterback. Penix needs to pull through in the clutch and probably in the fourth quarter, because this is going to be a close game. Whether we win it or lose it, it's going to come down to the last 4 or 5 minutes of the fourth quarter, and Penix is going to have to, as a sophomore, step up and make those plays.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, and I'm glad you mentioned Clifford's mobility once again, because if you look at just the passing numbers from last year's game, Peyton Ramsey had a better QBR. That's the ESPN QBR, which is out of 100 compared to Sean Clifford. Ramsey beat him 92-89 in that battle, and Ramsey went out and threw for 9 yards an attempt compared to Clifford's 7.8. Ramsey completed about 75% of his passes. Clifford couldn't even hit 50%. And even after all that, Indiana still lost by 7. So Penix has to be that much better than Clifford in order to win, especially when you include some of those rushing numbers that Clifford will almost certainly get, whether it's something like 50, 60 yards, and especially the timing and the effectiveness of those rushes. Definitely something to think about as we head into Saturday afternoon. So before we get into Indiana's defense against Penn State's offense, let's jump into your social media shout out. Matt, what do you have for us this evening?
Yeah, so Andrew Rude of Indiana HQ fame posted an article previewing the week 1 matchup this week over on indianahq.com. If you would be so kind and go read that and give Andrew some love, because he put a lot of work into that, please do. It's an excellent article. Andrew goes into a lot of different things that we even cover on this podcast, but even more in depth on the website in text version. So please go on over and read that. That's a great supplemental reading before the game. And if you could follow all the other Indiana HQ accounts. So we are Indiana HQ. That is Indiana HQ. No fancy schmancy stuff on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. So go follow us on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook under Indiana HQ. On Instagram, if you want to follow us, we're indiana.hq on Instagram. That's a dot between Indiana and HQ. Go follow us on Instagram for that. And then, if you want to go follow Nithin and me as well, that'd be great too. All the follows everywhere.
Yeah, and while you're at it, follow Andrew as well.
Yeah,
we're all very easy to find. It's the one time we're going to throw all of our accounts out there. We're going to do it before basketball season kicks off as well, tips off as well in about a month. It's your one-stop shop for everything you need to know. Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Make sure you follow. Make sure you subscribe, because we're going to have articles, previews, recaps, analytics. We're going to have things you need to know from the game. In-depth stuff that you won't see anywhere else, press conference videos and video and audio, all sorts of things you need to know if you're a big IU football or basketball fan. So let's dive into the defense, Matt. Indiana's defense going up against Penn State's offense. We've talked about how Indiana's defense can be streaky at times, to put it kindly. Penn State last year, they're an interesting team when you look at the offensive side of the ball. Overall, they rate in the top 10 across college football. But if you want to look at some of the stats, they averaged 35.8 points per game last year, 15th in all of college football, more than teams like Oregon and Texas. And just for a frame of reference, I believe Texas has the highest number of points per game in college football this year of the teams that have played so far. Penn State went out and averaged 190 rush yards per game last season, 221 pass yards per game. The passing numbers a little bit less than the rushing numbers because they just like to run the ball so much. So the per game number is going to be a little bit depressed through the air. They rank 76th in college football in pass yards per game. But when you take their yards per attempt through the air, they bump up all the way to 50th. So when they do throw the ball, they're pretty efficient, especially last year when you have guys like KJ Hamler, Pat Fryermuth, and a few other game-changing running backs like like Journey Brown. So, Matt, first matchup here defensively, Indiana's run defense. How do you think they're going to hold up against the running game?
Yeah, this is going to obviously be a point of concern, especially with a Indiana defense that only runs two linebackers, right? When you're looking at run defense, you look at, okay, who are your guys up the middle, stopping and plugging the gaps, and then who are those guys that are filling in the gaps behind them? And with Indiana's defense, we only play two linebackers. We play a Husky position, which is like a safety that's been converted to linebacker and can play all over the place, which is great for pass defense, but a little bit of a risk for run defense. And when you look at this Penn State team, they averaged the 36th most rushing yards per game last year, and they're returning most of their offensive line. The caveat to that is they lost their star running back, Journey Brown, for the season. So they're going to be playing with Noah Kane, their secondary running back. It's Penn State, though. They will recruit high-level position and skill players at that position. So Noah Kane is nobody to scoff at. He's just not Journey Brown. So I look at this IU run defense too. If IU is going to lose this game, it's going to be the run defense choking the game away, because they need to force Sean Clifford to throw the ball through the air and make sure that he cannot run for first downs. And again, when we're talking about run defense, we're also talking about making sure the quarterback can't run either. Like, there's two people running back there, who can run back there. It's the running back and the quarterback. So the defense is going to have their hands full, especially that linebacking core.
I'm going to throw a number out here, Matt. All right, 396. You know what 396 is?
No.
396. 396, the number of rush yards Penn State had in their Cotton Bowl win over Memphis last season. The number 17 team in the country was Memphis, and they got taken to the slaughterhouse, 53-39, but that score is a little bit less indicative of how lopsided it was just in the trenches. Penn State was dominant, as you can imagine, against the AAC opponent that they faced. So when Indiana's defense...
But I thought UCF could beat Alabama. Sorry, my bad.
Well, yeah, that's... I guess Memphis only lost by 14. They did have a 13-7 lead after the first quarter. But in that game, Journey Brown had a big showing. 16 carries for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. Noah Kane, who's going to start for Penn State on Saturday, had 15 for 92 and 2 touchdowns of his own. And in fact, I believe he said after that game that he went and looked at the tape and said he was disappointed. And he said he should have had more. He should have done better than, averaging 6 yards a carry and scoring twice. Ricky Slade, who transferred, he had 5 carries for 58 yards. I mean, it was one of those things where Penn State could do everything and anything to run on Memphis. And if Indiana's not careful, that could happen again Saturday. Tom Allen made it very clear in his press conference on Monday that Andrew wrote about in that article you mentioned earlier. Allen said it clearly, just because Journey Brown's out doesn't mean all of a sudden Penn State's got some scrubs out there in the backfield.
Yeah.
Noah Cain's an established runner, and they've got some 4-star recruits coming in at running back, unsurprisingly, with Devin Ford and Kazia Holmes, a couple of guys who could bust a big run if Indiana's not careful. Devin Ford received a bit of playing time last year. In fact, he had 8 carries for 38 yards in Penn State's win over IU last season. So they're clearly comfortable giving him the ball a few times as well. So the guys up front, Cio, we talked about him. Jerome Johnson, we've said before that he's one of the most important players on this defense, maybe even second after Taiwan Mullen. James Head, Alfred Bryant, Michael Ziemba. Those are the guys up front for Indiana that have to hold Penn State to something like 4 or 5 yards a carry, rather than the 6 or 7 that we saw them put up against Memphis, even during garbage time. Really, it ended up being 7.5 yards per carry against the Tigers, which isn't going to get it done. So Indiana's run defense is going to have to come ready to play. The next interesting matchup I wanted to mention on this side of the ball is Indiana's experienced secondary going up against a number of unproven Penn State receivers. And much like the other side of the ball where IU's wide receivers need to beat Penn State's defensive backfield, Indiana's got to win the pass defense aspect of this game if they want to have any shot at winning.
Yeah, and when we're talking about college football as a whole, we're talking about shaky defense so far. If you've been watching any of the college football recently, a lot of 40 to 40 games. Nobody's playing defense out there. We need our secondary to show up on Saturday because we need to take away the Penn State wide receivers and their tight ends, Pat Freiermuth, right? I talked about him earlier. We need to take away the passing game and force them to try to run the ball against a stacked box. We need our corners to win one-on-one. Of course, I have the utmost confidence that Taiwan Mullen and that Reese Taylor are going to win one-on-one in their matchups. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the secondary does. But like we said, the secondary might be the best unit on the team, and it's up to them to play to that standard and that they are the best unit on the team.
Yeah, I like how you said that. I like how you said that, especially because Indiana's secondary might have to just line up man-to-man to beat up these Penn State receivers. I don't expect defensive coordinator Kane Womack, KCT Garden, and the rest of that defensive staff to give the corners and the safeties too much help. I think you're going to see Brian Fitzgerald, the Husky. In some games, he might be asked to drop back in coverage a lot of times. In this game, I think Brian Fitzgerald is going to have to step up in the box and protect against that running game that Penn State's got. You might have 6 or 7 guys committed to the run at all times for Indiana, especially committed to stopping Sean Clifford, even in passing situations. It's going to be Taiwan Mullen and Reese Taylor and Jamar Johnson and Devon Matthews going up against Penn State's unproven receivers in Parker Washington and Jahan Dotson and Isaac Lutz and some of the other guys that may get some playing time out there on the perimeter for Penn State. If they throw the ball effectively against Indiana, and if Sean Clifford ends up with 250 passing yards on 80% completion, it's going to be game over, and it's going to be pretty ugly for IU. So fingers crossed that guys like Taiwan Mullen and Reese Taylor stay healthy to give Indiana their best shot at winning this one. And I like how you were saying there were a lot of 40 to 40 games. Not at Georgia Tech on Saturday, where Clemson decided they were going to put a big old butt whipping.
It's also the ACC. I had a friend of mine try to explain how the ACC is better in football than the Big Ten, and I was just scoffing the whole time. He's like, look, Georgia Tech will have a close game with Clemson this weekend. And I said, mm-hmm. And then they went out 73-7. I was like, mm-hmm.
Yeah, right.
It's Clemson and everybody else in the ACC.
Good point. Well, Clemson smashed Miami just a couple weeks ago. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no way. There's no way the ACC is close to the Big
And
Ten
North
football.
Carolina just lost to FSU.
Yeah,
literally
no
losing to Jacksonville State the other week.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
No shot. No, FSU is no longer the Bobby Bowden or Jameis Winston FSU.
No.
It's a complete shell of who they used to be. It's funny. It's funny though. Yeah, I don't know. ACC might be better in Madden football or NCAA football, 2012, something like that. I don't know. But this is a part of the show I'm excited for, Matt. Let's have a little fun. It's time for our Big Ten pick of the week. It's a new segment we're going to have on our podcast where we look at some point spreads, some over-unders, maybe even make an upset pick. Places like DraftKings Sportsbook have become legalized in Indiana. So we're not experts by any means, but Matt, based on the point spreads and the over-unders, or even the favorites and the underdogs that you're seeing in the Big Ten this Saturday, what's your pick to click this Saturday as the Big Ten football season gets underway?
I have two for you, Nithin.
Ooh, okay, here we go.
One is IU. Give me the Hoosiers money line. Give it to me. I believe. Even though I don't think I predicted them to beat Penn State in my preview.
Yeah.
I have talked myself into it.
I love it.
I'm literally going to put $20 on them this weekend, by the way. And then the second pick is the Friday night game.
Ooh.
The Friday night game is Illinois at Wisconsin. Give me Illinois to cover. They are currently 20-point underdogs to Wisconsin. It's supposed to be 54 and rainy in Wisconsin. It's going to be an ugly, low-scoring game. I'd be surprised. The over-under is 51.5, but I'd be surprised if Wisconsin wins this game by 20. I think it's going to be closer than that. Again, Illinois beat them last year in Champaign, and now they're going to Camp Randall in Madison. I am assuming that Illinois is going to be pumped up for this game and going to give them one heck of a shot. I think Wisconsin pulls away and wins this by 2 touchdowns, but that's still 6 points under the spread. So give me the under on the 20-point under.
I love it. Yeah, right. I got you. And yeah, we're gonna keep track of this throughout the year. I'll throw a couple out there too. I'll take a straight up underdog this Saturday, like you took Indiana. I'm gonna take Purdue. Strangely enough. They're underdogs at home against Iowa, and I know Jeff Brom, has been hit with the positive COVID-19 diagnosis, but I just really like Rondale Moore, and I think with him back in the fold, there just isn't anyone on Iowa's defense fast enough or athletic enough to stop him. So I love Purdue there. And as far as a little point spread pick, I like Ohio State covering 26. I don't care how great Nebraska thinks they are. I think Ohio State's gonna. Yeah. There's no way I see Nebraska keeping that game within 26 points. I think Ohio State's gonna do a Clemson on Nebraska, basically beat them 73-7. 26 isn't nearly enough for that noon kickoff on Saturday. So I've got Ohio State covering that.
My other one that I was thinking about instead of Wisconsin, Illinois was the Michigan-Minnesota game. By the way, which is going to be a lot of fun to watch, 7:30 on ABC. Yeah. That's a great way to welcome back Big Ten football, is always watching Michigan lose in prime time, 8 o'clock in Minnesota in the cold weather. But the Michigan's currently favored by 3.5. I just don't see them going into Minnesota with all the problems they're having with COVID and beating the Golden Gophers.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's not the Michigan football team that is, there hasn't been reports of the team itself getting positive.
It's the university, but
just a bit of a spread in the university. But I mean, you talk about the Big Ten football season starting on Saturday. The Big Ten football season might end on Saturday if Penn State and Michigan both lose in week 1. Ohio State might run away with the title unless Indiana's got something to say about it. The one other matchup I'm excited to watch, I'm not sure which way I'm leaning about this, is at the same time on Saturday night, Maryland taking on Northwestern on BTN. We talked about Peyton Ramsey getting the go. He's going to face a Big Ten East opponent, someone he's familiar with in Maryland in that first matchup. So I think Northwestern is I'm going to be rooting for Northwestern against Maryland. I'll tell you that much, especially because it would help the Hoosiers in the standings gain a little bit of ground.
You're not pumped up for the Rutgers-Michigan State matchup? That's not just tickling your fancy?
That's one I will not be watching. To be perfectly honest with you, I think I saw Bruce Feldman with The Athletic. I shouldn't be referencing this off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure that's right. I believe he had Indiana finishing 4th in the Big Ten East, Michigan State 5, Maryland 6, Rutgers 7. I'm not going to be spending too much time watching those bottom 3 teams this year unless Indiana faces them. So that's where that's at. We're going to keep track of how we do throughout the year. I'm afraid to see how things will develop over the course of 9 weeks, but it is what it is. We'll try to give you guys an upset pick as well as a pick against the spread each week. If there's stuff we're confident about. As we wind down here, Matt, going into Saturday, let's go with a prediction. You talked about maybe leaning towards Indiana a little bit. What are you laying down on Tuesday night as we're 4 days away from the start of the opener?
Well, when I finally went into depth on this matchup, and when you do a preseason prediction, you kind of just skim the teams and take your picks. But when it comes down to it, when we're reviewing the stuff, we do have to go through all the numbers, everything that's coming back. We're realizing who's going to be staying, who's leaving, who's playing, who's sitting out, who's injured. But all this considered, with Journey Brown out, it has changed my prediction from a Penn State win to an Indiana win. I think Indiana pulls this out in some miracle fashion. I look at our kicker, Charlie Campbell, as somebody who's going to hit a game-winning field goal this game. I'm going out on a limb saying that's going to happen. The staff is going to put him in that position. He's going to nail it. IU 31-28. Give it to me. Nail it. There it is.
I love it. I love that. I love that. Yeah, Indiana has played Penn State pretty close the last few years, right? Yeah. It's a matchup that has always been interesting, but Penn State's always found a way to get the win, except for the one matchup a few years ago where Nate Sudfeld found a way to get the W for IU. I feel the exact same way that you feel, Matt. I mean, everything you said, I'm just going to regurgitate. I think it's going to be a close game. I think the offense is going to put a handful of points on the board. I'm a little concerned about Penn State's secondary. If I was a Nittany Lions fan, I'd be a little bit uncomfortable with some of the new names in new places in that defense. I've got Indiana 30-27. Yeah, pretty similar score, just a point or two off of yours. Penn State's a really good team. I just don't think they're the 8th best. And here's the deal. I think Indiana's a really good team, and I don't know where Indiana ends up this year. But, it's going to be interesting if Penn State does lose week 1. They follow it up with the matchup against Ohio State in week 2, and I don't think Penn State's going to beat Ohio State. So Nittany Lions could be starting 0-2 here in the first 2 in the first 2 weeks of the season, which I'm sure would make Nittany Lions fans enraged, to put it lightly. So that's how we feel about this game. I threw out a poll question over our Indiana HQ Twitter account, asking all of you, hey, do you see Penn State covering? Do you see Penn State winning, but by less than a touchdown, or do you see Indiana winning? And we've already gotten 130 votes in the first hour of this poll being out, and the majority of people are saying Indiana, which is not surprising because we've got IU fans following us. But let me ask you, Matt. Let me ask you to guess, what percentage of fans do you think voted for Indiana to get the win?
We're an Indiana account, so I'm going to go 80% IU.
Ooh, you're a little bit high. It's 64% right now. Be more 130. Yeah, how dare you not all 100% of you give the Indiana fans give the Indiana the win. But IU got 60 is at 64% right now. Penn State winning by more than 7 is at 21%. Penn State winning by less than a touchdown is at 15% right now. Still 4 days to vote. This will be open really until kickoff on Saturday afternoon, I should say. So, Wednesday, Thursday.
13 days to vote, Nithin. What are you talking
about? Oh, well, I'm talking about voting in this poll. Don't want to confuse anyone out there. But yeah, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, head over to Indiana HQ if you haven't made your pick yet. It'll be interesting to see where everything lays itself out. But folks, that about wraps it up for our 164th edition of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. To hear more fantastic episodes like the one you heard today, be sure to follow Indiana HQ to make sure you don't miss any in the future. You can also go to our website, indianahq.com, to find everything in one place. Lastly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review, tell a friend, share our links. Your support really helps us grow this podcast and reach more passionate IU fans like yourselves. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.